board with the text. The text that I'm using has exactly the same lines that you all have. This is exactly the same text that you have. So when you see me underline certain lines on the board, that's the exact same lines that you have. Act 1 is really interesting because you get this fascinating exchange between Portia and the Prince of Morocco. And what's cool about that?
Act 2.
Act 2, excuse me, thank you. Yes. And what's cool about that, thank you, here we go, is that Morocco has darker skin. And the entire conversation between Morocco and Portia is, on the one hand, is kind of like a typical two young people or teenagers kind of like trying to do the dance of dating. And that's kind of interesting to look at it. But there's this element of race in their conversation that makes their conversation really, really tricky and at some points quite intense. And first thing I want you to do is figure out how Morocco is bragging. And of course, it's not allowing me to. Oh, here's my pen. There we go. Come on. Well, it's not. So I want to let my pen work here. Come on. Oh, well, I'll just do it with the cursor here. And so I want you to see in lines the first speech of Morocco. How does he brag? That's what I'm looking for. You should be marking up your books as well because I'm not going to be able to mark up the screen the way I would like. Okay. So what I'm looking for in his first speech is what does he say about himself in order to kind of woo Portia? And frankly, remember Portia in Act 1 said, you know, if this guy's got dark skin, I don't want to have anything to do with him, right? I would rather he shrive me than wive me. Even if he's a saint, even if he's an important person, I'd rather he just be my priest than my husband if he's got dark skin. So she's expressed prejudice previously, but she's impressed with this guy. She thinks he's handsome, and his brag wins her over a little bit. And she's kind of altering her previous disdain for him, right?
Wait, Mr. G, why is he Morocco? Morocco's a country. He's a prince of that kingdom.
So he's a prince of Morocco. He's a prince of Morocco. Well, and this is a good question. So royalty often doesn't go by their name John or Jerry or Eric. Royalty often goes by their title as their name. And so he's the Prince of Morocco, and Shakespeare calls him Morocco.
Oh.
Right? Good question. And then he's more of his brag. And right here on lines 25 to 30, you'll notice that he's really, really bragging by referencing Greek mythology and Persian mythology. I will be impressed and give class participation extra credit to someone who looks up on Wikipedia some of the Greek or the Persian mythology to figure out how Morocco is, how he's referring to this mythology in order to brag about himself. That would be impressive if you took the time to do that. It would be neat. But nevertheless, he's referencing heroes in mythology. And what I really want you to pay attention to is at the bottom of his next speech, he refers to trying to win Portia as something that has to do with dice or fortune. His whole act is actually often talking about money. When people are talking about love, they use all this language that has to do with money. Risk, gambling, fortune, right? When people are talking about friendship, they suddenly use all this language that has to do with, like the business world, exchanges and bartering, right? And buying and selling. This play is all about the idea of transactions. They may be talking about friendship, or they may be talking about love, or they may be talking about family, but underneath it, there's a commentary going on about money. Does that make sense?
That's called the Merchant of Venice.
That's right. This is the merchant theme. Good. So you'll see that. Please pay attention to that as you read, okay, in that first scene. All the parts that have to do with money. Morocco, now at the end of that scene, Morocco's going to try and pick the right casket, but we won't see him pick the right or wrong casket until the end of the act. So this happens in movies as well, where suddenly something's about to happen, but the camera kind of cuts away, and we don't revisit that storyline until later. that make sense? Right? Then you've got a brand new storyline. This is a guy named Lancelot. Lancelot is a slave. Notice that he does not speak in poetry. His language goes all the way to the end of the line, right? Because he's a poor person, and in Shakespeare's plays, only the wealthy people in the plays speak with poetry because they're educated. And poor people's words just run all together. And this guy is a slave or an indentured servant, and he serves Shylock. He's Shylock's. I'll answer questions later. Just let me get to the study guide, okay? I'll answer questions later. Let me get to the study guide. I'll answer questions later. Let me get to the study guide. You can listen to the video over and over.
Oh, okay.
Okay? And so Lancelot is Shylock's indentured servant. It's kind of like a slave, but the slave can kind of pick new masters. And what he's debating in this speech is really hard to understand because he's using all of this slang from the Elizabethan era that the people in the pit would have really understood because a lot of them were servants. But what I really want you to get to is line 20 to line 30 at the end, where he captures the dilemma. And in Christianity, in Old and New Testament interpretations, there are several lines in the Old Testament that endorses slavery. There is a famous line that says, "Slaves, obey your masters." So a lot of Christians throughout the years have interpreted that as justifying slavery, right? Including in the Old South, right? These were lines that were used to justify the morality of slavery. On the other hand, Christianity also says, stay away from the devil, right? And there are lots and lots of lines in the Bible that say that for people of this religious persuasion. And so the slave has a dilemma because on the one hand, he's supposed to obey his master, but on the other hand, he thinks his master, the Jew, Shylock, is a devil, right? So look at the way he talks about his dilemma and see if you can figure out here what choice he decides to make and why he makes that choice. How does he resolve the fact that he's got no good option here? Either whatever he does, he's disobeying a religious command. Slaves, obey your masters, or stay away from the devil, right? So he's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. It's called a dilemma. Then you get a really, really confusing scene, and that's where his dad, Gobbo, arrives. Gobbo is Lancelot's last name, and this is his father, and his father hasn't seen him for a long time because people just kind of like sent their kids off, right? And so Gobbo hasn't seen Lancelot in a long, long time and doesn't recognize his son. And he's showing up. I think he's got dinner or gifts or something to see. So it's probably been years since he's seen his kid. And Lancelot recognizes his dad because his dad still looks the same as he remembers him, but his dad doesn't recognize Lancelot. And Lancelot uses all these insults. See them line 40 to 50 or so in there. This whole dialogue. He basically just insults his father up and down because his dad doesn't know who he is. And so he takes this opportunity. Like imagine you could be masked around your parents and say whatever you wanted to say to them. And Lancelot, in that situation, chooses to insult his father like crazy. Can you find the best insults? That's what I would like for you to pay attention to in their exchange, the best insults that Lancelot gives to his dad, Gobbo. Lancelot has decided to leave Shylock, and finally he reveals to his father, Gobbo, who he is, and he says, "Dad, can you introduce me to Bassanio because you're my dad, you're the one that's supposedly supposed to pick my master. Can you introduce me to Bassanio because he's the guy that I want as my new master. I'm going to run away from Shylock and I want to be with Bassanio." How much time do I have? I want to make sure I'm not on Wednesdays.
12 minutes.
12 minutes. Okay, so I got plenty of time. So that goes on and on and on. That will be very hard for you to read. Does everybody hear me say that? Yeah, scene 2 is going to be tough because it's full of all this slang used by a servant in Elizabethan times, right? It's very, very hard to understand. It would be like somebody from Elizabethan times trying to drop in on your Instagram account and understand what all the slang references that you guys use mean. It's like me trying to understand what that guy was talking about online, right? It's very difficult. So it will be tough for you. All I want you to concentrate on is how Lancelot resolves his dilemma and what are the insults he gives to his dad. I want you to get the comedy out of those insults, the funny parts. Does that make sense? Yes? No? Maybe? Am I saying you shouldn't read it? Am I saying you shouldn't try and understand it? I'm just saying don't let it bog you down. Focus on those two issues, right? Then Bassanio shows up, and he and Lancelot make a deal, and they make a deal. Okay, I'll take you as a servant. They have this exchange. His father blesses the deal. Wait a minute. Here's another deal happening, right? Where a human being is actually being traded, right? So look in this conversation once again for the concept of money. Any language, any images, anything at all that you come across that you think is really a subtle conversation about money, circle it and let's talk about it. Does that make sense? At the end of the scene, Lancelot gives Bassanio a piece of paper, a note from Jessica, who we haven't even met yet. And Jessica is Shylock's daughter. And he says, hey, I was supposed to give you this message. When I asked you, Jessica knew I was coming to you to ask you to be my new master, and I'm supposed to give you this message from her. This is from Shylock's daughter. Bassanio in this scene here is impressed and shocked with the piece of paper, and he hands it to his buddy, Leonardo. Leonardo is a great name for a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. But in this play, Leonardo is the man that Jessica, Shylock's daughter, is secretly in love with. So what do you think is in the note? Not just a love letter, not just money, although interestingly enough, there is a commentary on money in the note. What do you think? You think Jessica's dad wants her to be with a Christian, Leonardo? So when parents tell kids who are in love not to be with each other, what do they sometimes threaten to do? Run away. And it's a plan to run away. And not just run away, but as Sarah referenced, she's not just going to run away, she's going to take all of Shylock's jewels with her. So she's not just going to betray her father by marrying a Christian and running away, she's also going to steal everything he's got. And remember, Jews could not inherit money, right? And so one of the ways that Jews got around the fact that they could not inherit money is that they tried to keep their money not in property, but in something that the government couldn't find. Like what? Jewelry, something's very portable that nobody would know that they have, that they can hide very easily. Does that make sense? And so she's basically going to take all of his money. All right, so Bassanio and Gratiano then debate. Bassanio and Gratiano and Leonardo then debate what is the plan for how to steal Jessica away. Okay. Now we finally meet Jessica. Scene 3. This is Shylock's daughter, Jessica. Lancelot shows back up and tells Jessica that he has delivered the message to Bassanio, and also Bassanio gave it to her lover, Leonardo, and oh, this is what Leonardo said. And what I want you to pay attention to is first impressions of Jessica. It's really the first time we've ever seen her. She's betraying her father. She's running away. But yet, she's also betraying the quote-unquote villain of the play, a Jew, who the Elizabethan audience would have been prejudiced against. And so I want you to look at how does she come across? What are her values? If I can write that very well, I'll try. What are her values? Oh, that's terrible. What is her personality? What's she like? First impressions are so important in Shakespeare's plays. The first lines that a character speaks usually captures their entire personality. Okay. You have two female heroines, Portia and Jessica, and both of them are involved in love affairs, right? That at the beginning of this play have some difficulty. Portia's love affair has difficulty because the man that she wants to be with hasn't picked the right casket yet, and all these other men are trying to pick them. And the man that she wants to be with, Bassanio, is broke, which that makes a big problem. And Jessica has an obstacle to her love affair, which is that she has to run away from her Jewish father and marry a Christian in order to be with the man that she loves. This is the scene, and it is quite disturbing, scene 4. Where Lancelot shows up, and he's basically delivering letters back and forth between Jessica and Graciano and Leonardo and the guys, Jessica and her man. And this is the plan where they're going to help spring Jessica. And so Lancelot, the slave, shows back up with the letter. He's got the plan, and Lorenzo, Lancelot, Salarino, all the guys come up with the plan, and they decide that they're going to mask tonight. You all, even if you're Catholic, you probably don't have Mardi Gras like they did in New Orleans. But in the medieval age, Catholics had all of these festivals where they dressed up in costume, in particular, where they masked themselves. And so at this night is actually a big Christian festival like Mardi Gras, and they're going to mask themselves. They're going to be in costume, but that's going to be a convenient disguise for the fact that they're really going to steal Jessica away from her father, and she's going to dress as a man, right? Because it wasn't just Jews that had a lot of restrictions in the medieval age. It was also women. And so women were not allowed to be out at night. And so this is a really good night to spring Jessica from her dad's house, because everybody's going to be wearing costumes and masks anyway, so nobody will notice that it's a woman on the streets at night. Women had curfews. Even adult women had curfews. And so they weren't allowed to be on the street at night. So that's how they're going to spring her.
She said that all Shakespearean parts were played by men.
Yes, in the Elizabethan time, as opposed to today where actors make a filthy amount of money, in the Elizabethan time, to be an actor was the worst job you could have. It was worse than being a prostitute. It was one of the worst jobs. It was very looked down upon. And so there were actually laws against women being actors. So when Romeo and Juliet was put on stage, Juliet would have been played by a young boy with a very thin beard who had makeup and was wearing a dress. All of the actors on Shakespeare's stage would have been men. Which is not too bad because they didn't have a movie camera, and it's not like you could get a close-up anyway. If you were like in the back of the Globe Theater, you couldn't, you know what I mean? It was really about the costume anyway, right? But yes, no, it was very much looked down upon as a profession, so much so that women were forbidden from actually being actors and actresses. Oh, how the times have changed. Now actors and actresses are paid an exorbitant amount of money for somewhat doubtful labor. All right, this is what I really want you to look at. Lorenzo, 35 and 40 here. This is Act 4, I believe. And I really want you to look at what is his motivation. Is it love? What does he want with the girl? And you just wait, you read it. And I might have gotten it wrong before that I said that Leonardo was the boyfriend, but I think maybe it's Lorenzo. And that just shows you that your teacher also gets confused with all these names. Does that make sense? It's Lorenzo that's the actual boyfriend.
Back in scene 2, he hands the paper to Leonardo.
Yeah, and Leonardo is like going to pass it off to Lorenzo. And if you can correct the teacher on how that whole interchange happens, I'll be very impressed. It's very complicated. Shakespeare likes all these complicated people passing messages off to each other. And then this I want you to pay attention to in scene 5. This is the first time we see Jessica and Shylock on stage together. And I want you to look at what she thinks of her dad based on the words that they have with each other. I really want you to zero in on who treats who badly and why and how. Maybe they both treat each other badly. I want you to analyze the lines that show how they feel about each other. Does that make sense? I got 60 seconds. I can get through just a little bit more. Hold on. He tells her not to go out. He restricts her. Look at how they talk to each other. This is very important to look and see what their relationship is. This is the first time that we actually see them on stage together. Shylock then leaves. Jessica's there. Graciano Solano, etc. This is the boneheads that are all the guys that are showed up in costume to spring Jessica. And then Lorenzo is there. Jessica shows up. She's dressed as a boy. Probably she was in the ghetto, the Jewish ghetto, which actually was walled off neighborhood. And so a window had to be opened from the inside, and she has to jump out the window into the street below. Like literally, this was like a gated community, except it wasn't gated to keep people out. It was gated to keep all the Jews in. So this is actually pretty risky for Jessica, right? She's not just a woman leaving her neighborhood. She's a Jew leaving her neighborhood. And then the play will wrap up with scene 7. The act will wrap up with scene 7 where Morocco picks his casket. And he reads all the riddles. And here is where I want you to concentrate. He reads the riddles on each of the caskets, and he picks one of the caskets. And of course, we all know that he doesn't pick the right one. But what I'm interested in here is, can you figure out what his logic is? Why he picks the casket that he picks. Even if you figure out the words or the 3 or 4 lines that capture his logic, even if you don't exactly understand the logic, but you know, I think his reason is in these 5 lines, I'll be very impressed. Does that make sense? Does that sound so bad? Not so bad. Read every word, but I've gone over the parts to concentrate on for you. Got it? I probably got a few things wrong. If you come back on Friday and correct me about things like that, I'll be very impressed. So feel free to correct me. I'll try and put this video online now.
Well, whose review was it?